Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Senator Erickson.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the April 18 meeting of the Spark Executive Committee. I'm David Tolan, Service Chair, and let me start by first calling the roll. President Masterson. President Masterson.
Here.
Speaker Reichman.
Here.
Secretary Burns-Wallace.
Here.
Mr. Orman. Mr. Orman. Mr. Pickert. Mr. Pickert. And Mr. Rolfe.
Here.
Okay. Why don't we give it just a couple more minutes, see if we have any other members join here. We'll give it till 3:02.
If you don't mind, Lieutenant Governor Tolan, I'm going to start sharing my screen just to get it set up.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, John. Okay, well, it's 3:02. We do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. We've got John Paralisi, our director, with us. John, do you want to kick us off with an update on the advisory panels?
Sure. In terms of today, the agenda is really, I'll go through a kind of brief overview around advisory panel status. And then really the bulk of the time is going to be the chairs presenting for health and education in terms of the recommendations, as well as economic revitalization, and then spend a little bit of time at the end for next steps. So we talked about this a little bit on Friday when the first two panels presented, but once again, I made the point of including this in every single Spark presentation, but it's really getting back to making sure that we touch upon the guiding principles that the Spark Executive Committee put together for how it was thinking about the portfolio that would come out of this process in terms of really looking at one-time investments, looking at where the sweet spot really was for this set of funds and opportunities to leverage these funds with any other source of funds to the extent appropriate. The third one is the one that I think everyone, kind of really took to heart, was around fostering long-term systemic impact for Kansas. And how it was described once was looking back 10 years from now. Could you say the investments here were really catalytic around helping to put Kansas on a great path? And then the next three consider equitable opportunities and outcomes, which is really something that plays in quite a bit when you're thinking about the portfolio. Enabling the appropriate flexibility with the investment strategies, and then ensuring on the back end results are measurable, enable tracking and transparency, and that even extended into the process itself in terms of the transparency and making sure that we were working appropriately in the COMA and CORE guidelines. Once again, touched on this very briefly last time, but this just really outlines the process that right from the start we were working through with all of the advisory panels in terms of thinking strategically around the areas that they were tasked to look at, looking at a variety of different sources to gain inspiration, identify the areas of greatest need and opportunity, the highest leverage points within those areas, and kind of work down the funnel in order to prioritize the absolute highest value things to propose to the Spark Executive Committee. So once again, today is also an informational meeting, and this is when we're going to talk or have the panel chairs for Health and Ed and Economic Revitalization present their recommendations and answer questions from the Spark Executive Committee. Just as a reminder, once again, in terms of looking at the remaining funds to work with, it's approximately $397 million, which is still quite a bit of funds, obviously. And that's a little bit higher than it would have been because there was some FRF recruitment from FEMA for testing. And there also could be other funds coming back into this set of funds. So the thought being, that with across all the recommendations coming up from the advisory panels, obviously it's going to be more than $397 million worth of potential investments. And so that gives the Spark Executive Committee the opportunity to be able to make some trade-offs, but also potentially to have a bench of next items to look at in case any other funds come into the pot at the end of the day. And just, in terms of kind of setting the stage for the two advisory panels that are going to be talking today, Health and Ed and Economic Revitalization definitely had a lot more submission ideas that they received than the other two panels. And also just the dollar volume of what was in those funding asks associated with the idea submissions was higher as well. One thing I do want to note here is that number is lower than the number that was first reported in terms of that kind of aggregate funding request associated with the idea submissions. The reason being is that there were 2 or 3 submissions that when we just went back and we're doing some data cleanup actually partway through the process, so we caught it early, that looked like they were in the billions of dollars, but when we looked at the data within the submissions, we thought there may have been actually a keying error and they may have meant millions. We went back in and asked the submitters, and it turned out we were right. So that overall number came down to quote unquote only $7.9 billion, still very significant, but just in the interest of transparency, really wanted to share that with folks. So with that, just as we did on Friday, I am going to transition to being the slide jockey here for the advisory panel chairs. And so the next one up is the Health and Education Advisory Panel portfolio recommendations from the 2 chairs, Senator Erickson and Robin Chadwick.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to the Executive Committee for the opportunity to present today. And I want to thank all of our panelists for their engagement and partnership throughout the Spark process to date. And I especially want to thank Robin Chadwick, who's been a tremendous vice chair and partner throughout this process, and John and his team for their hard work in providing the framework, resources, and organization to get to this point today. As chairs of the Health and Education Advisory Panel, we have the opportunity to share our recommendations today that have been built over the past 3 months. And I want to report that this panel worked very hard to digest and evaluate the 254 submitted ideas, understand the needs that are facing our state, and develop programs that will be lasting investments in critical areas of health and healthcare and education for Kansans statewide. So with that, let's dig into our presentation. Panelists focused on key needs across these 5 areas you see on the screen. We approached the portfolio development process by looking at these needs. Basic needs include a lack of supportive housing and employment support for individuals with disabilities. Access and awareness included the need to connect families and communities to existing social services and be able to navigate those systems. Workforce development was a huge area for us because we know that there's dire shortages in health and childcare workers statewide. Availability and affordability, especially challenges facing Kansans looking for affordable health and childcare services. And then data systems, including fragmented early childhood data systems and their lack of ability to interact together. So those are the 5 areas we focused on. Next slide, please. And Robin, please feel free to jump in at any time. So to evaluate public investment submissions, our panel developed a set of principles to consider alongside the SPARK guiding principles laid out by the executive committee. These included a focus on evidence-based programs that drive long-term transformation in areas where current funding is insufficient and limiting investment in programs that will create ongoing cost burden for the state, which we know was very important consideration for the committee. The panel principles allowed us to focus on areas of statewide need, childcare capacity and telehealth adoption, for example. And we also wanted to deprioritize short-term and ongoing investments. Next slide, please, John. So as was mentioned before, we had 254 submissions across those 5 areas of needs. So we looked across these submissions and we wanted to identify areas of the highest need and best fit with the SPARK executive and advisory panel principles. So from that, we developed 5 submissions that we thought were a high fit with programs as designed, and then they were aggregated into those 8 portfolio recommendations that you see on the right, which we will dig in more deeply here shortly. Next. So we met 6 times to develop these recommendations to build a shared understanding of current needs and reflect on the ideas that were submitted. And so I'm sure you've seen kind of this process with the other panels, but each one of the rectangles with the 6 check marks, those are the topics when we met, the process we went through, and then we filtered our ideas down from those 254 using that process to get to where we are today. Any questions, comments? Great. So the recommendations shared today were shaped by the advisory panel, and it included knowledgeable experts and stakeholders that are deeply invested in the future of Kansas. And we want to thank them again for their engagement in envisioning the future of healthcare and education in our state. So our bottom line proposal is between 125 and $252 million. We were able to come to a consensus on our final meeting on today's recommendations. The funding envelopes were informed by prioritization of each program, the evidence of need, and based on the idea submissions. We'll spend more time on each of these in greater detail in the next few slides. And if I'm going too fast or you guys want to slow down or ask any questions or wait till the end, feel free to jump in. Okay, so for health program recommendations, totaled 60 million to 135 million. And these are focused on addressing key gaps in availability and access with long-term interventions that limit ongoing costs. And you'll keep hearing me say that limit the ongoing costs because we know that these are one-time dollars. We don't want to build in something that's going to require ongoing investment at the local or the state level. So targeted supportive housing and employment, we came up with about 30 to 50 million in that category. We know that Kansas lacks capacity to meet supported housing and employment needs today. This will increase access to these services, particularly for those who are elderly, mentally or physically disabled, in recovery, or experiencing homelessness. It represents a clear area of panel participation because you can see it was 20 to 24% of our overall recommendations. It will positively impact these populations and improve discharge capacity for health facilities while increasing access to health services. And this was obviously a big goal for our panelists. So some examples of these high-fit submissions are transitional programs with behavioral health services for incarcerated foster youth and behavioral health urgent care clinic development. For health facilities or program expansion, that was $25 to $75 million. And this is designed to address statewide capacity constraints on our healthcare systems, and was another clear priority for the panel that represented 20 to 30% of the overall recommendations. This area includes a broad variety of projects across the continuum of care to meet local and regional needs. Projects could include health facility infrastructure, development or renovation, or support new models to deliver health services. We really felt like focusing on expanding facilities and existing programs was a focus area for us. And some examples of high-fit submissions include recovery housing for low-income populations, recovery housing for homeless families, and for single women. The final area on this slide is telehealth adoption and utilization, which we put at $5 to $10 million. And what we know from the pandemic is that telehealth services require more than broadband alone to ensure their utilization and availability. This program is focused on increasing telehealth services in high-need communities by expanding service offerings and increasing awareness of available services. What our goal is to complement investments made in connectivity, because we know that those discussions are going on in different with different groups. So an example of high-fit submissions include nurse intake and triage programs and remote patient monitoring technology. So any questions, comments on that slide? Okay, great. The next slide deals with education program recommendations, and this totaled 30 to 57 million. And we know education program areas span needs again in availability and affordability and data and systems integration. A lot of this centered around childcare. Excuse me. So the first area is childcare capacity, which was 25 to 50 million of our recommendations. And we know that this area was exacerbated by the pandemic, and critical shortages continue today. So this represents another area of our prioritization at 20% of overall recommendations. What we did was we tried to design something to jumpstart capacity expansion locally with the support of community partners, such as employers, local governments, nonprofits, and more. This model ensures that investments in greater childcare capacity are sustainable over the long haul. Some example of high-fit submissions include a family resource center expansion, childcare facilities development, or renovations. And then we want to encourage some innovation in childcare capacity as well. Statewide math enhancement, it came up during education discussions. We know that the pandemic has really seen our kids have great learning loss. And so this was a recommendation to try to address particularly the decrease we've seen in math achievement. But the pandemic disrupted learning all across the state. What we're hoping is this would support an investment in Math Nation, which is a suite of supplemental math resources for middle and high school students, including learning videos, personalized curriculum, study guides, and more. And one of the things I'd like to mention is, even though it's specific to Math Nation, if a district is using a math program that works for them and they're seeing success, that's great. This would provide another tool in their toolbox to help address those lagging math scores. And finally, we have early childhood data integration and system enhancements. Statewide early childhood data systems related to healthcare and childcare are fragmented and create challenges to coordinate and use existing data to inform care. Search and referral systems, which serve as critical access points for families, providers, and governments, similarly face fragmentation challenges. So we know there have been recent efforts to improve this, such as the cross-agency collaboration called the Kansas Early Childhood Data Trust. These efforts have had initial success, but they need additional resourcing to continue. So this program would accelerate these efforts, which would ideally lead to improved accountability, effectiveness, and quality of early childhood services to children and families across the state. And again, an example of this would be enhancements to that program, the Early Childhood Integrated Data System. So any questions or thoughts so far? Great. Next. So then we have an area which basically includes cross-cutting with health and education program recommendations, and this totaled 35 to 60 million. And these programs will have a broad impact on both health and education, focused specifically on addressing workforce shortages and improving access and awareness of existing support services. So the workforce pipeline development, we recommend 20 to 25 million, which is 10 to 16% of the overall portfolio. As I mentioned earlier, workforce development is a huge priority. We hear constantly that businesses are struggling with having enough qualified and skilled workers. So hopefully we're going to address some of that with some caveats. The program that we recommended will focus on investments that hopefully have a long-term impact, such as education assistance to recruit new professionals to the field and workforce development programs to meet existing needs and support retention. We explicitly chose not to invest in premium pay to ensure that investments have a lasting impact. And we repeatedly identified the need for systemic interventions for the state to recruit and retain health and child care workers. After considering submissions that came in, we recommend the 20 to 25 to begin this process, but we also know that that's not going to be enough to address this area, but are hopeful that more transformative ideas emerge. And Robin, I know that you had some concerns and some insight into this area, if you would like to share at this time.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. The portfolio that we looked at did have quite a number of submissions and ideas, but it was a lot of what I continued to call onesie twosie ideas. 5 scholarships here, a little bit of assistance there, some bonus pay here. So things that would have helped for a minute in very isolated pockets of our state. And I think the thing that we were missing in the proposals that we looked at was, I kept calling it the big idea. And I liken it to what the STEM initiative has done for science, technology, engineering, and math. I mean, we have the STEM work has been in schools for probably 20 years and have recruited so many kids, beginning and getting them interested in elementary and middle school. And health and education have not done that. And I think if we could look for some systemic change in our state, it would be something akin to a STEM movement, where we really come together to begin to tackle how do we develop that pipeline when kids are still in middle school, high school. So as Senator Erickson said, the proposals that we would fund would just be a very, very cursory beginning.
Thank you, Robin. Next, we have community-based resources and navigation. We know that there are challenges with navigating existing social support services, and that's nothing new, but the pandemic has really made that a much bigger issue. So we want to increase access to these services, and to do that, we want to centralize and simplify resource navigation specifically to support high needs communities. So potential projects may include expanding and enhancing resource centers, training, deploying, and engaging community health workers. And the goal is for these projects to ensure that people can easily go to centralized locations or work with single points of contacts to support them in navigating and accessing social services. I know we heard repeatedly, especially during the pandemic, that support was so fragmented, people had trouble navigating the system. So our goal in looking at these areas was to try to help centralize or provide that single source so that it's not so difficult for families to get the support that they need. So example of high fit submissions in this area include healthy food access, and there was a submission for a community garden that received a lot of support from panelists, as well as community health and wellness center development. Okay, next, John. So idea submissions rated by panelists as high fit within the program parameters. So we looked at each submission and rated it as high, medium, or low in terms of fit with the guiding principles, impact, and feasibility. Based on this, you'll see at the bottom, a total of 79 submissions were identified as high fit overall. Example of high fit ideas across the programs have been listed as a reference for the type of projects considered when developing our funding envelopes. Idea submissions range from small investments with near-term impact to larger catalytic investments addressing major gaps in the health and education landscape in Kansas. So there's quite a bit of information on this slide to digest. So if we want to take just a minute for the executive committee to be able to look at that and ask any clarifying questions, let's wait just a moment and give time to do that.
If executive committee members have questions or comments on this sheet, this would be a good time to ask.
Renee, I'm having a little bit of difficulty following exactly how we're doing this. This is the these are the health and education ideas here, the 79 ideas, the 531 million. Is that, as I read down this, it kind of matches up with what you had in the health and education area. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. and the workforce pipeline development, community-based resources is not on this. You've got ranges for health of 60 to 135 and education of 30 to 57 on a previous slide. So I guess just doing round math, it's 90 million to 190 million, something like that. This has got 531 million on it. I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out, you guys prioritize this list, or is 79 prioritized items?
Yeah, well, what this is, and thank you, Bill, for that question. Yeah, the number of high fit submissions came out to 79. The amount associated with that is going to be larger because we did not pare down the amount per se. And we also need to include the cross-cutting. On the previous slide, you mentioned the health and education. Then we had those that kind of impacted both, which was an additional 35 to 60 million. But yeah, the millions associated in that third column is the total without us having pared that down. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on that, John.
Yeah, it's the, the panel looked at the idea submissions as inspiration, but then decided what it wanted to allocate programmatically in terms of funding envelopes to each one of those areas. So obviously, in terms of health facilities or program expansion, even though there were 22 high fit idea submissions that total 287 million, the panel decided when it was setting the program parameters that, yeah, it wouldn't make sense to try and fund all of those.
And then, Bill, that final column, if there were 3 or more panelists that had rated those as like the high priority, high fit, you'll see that on the next slide, I believe. Those are kind of the ones that are bulleted out in that last column. Does that help?
Yeah, so for instance, this has got 287 million in health facilities and program expansion, and you're recommending that 25 to 75 be funded based on the previous slides, but you don't necessarily pick which items would be in that 25 to 75, or what should be the priority items in that area.
We do, and I believe you've been, has the executive committee been provided that information, John? I believe they have.
Yeah, they saw all the idea submissions and how many votes, high fit votes, each one of them got. So keep in mind, all of these idea submissions, would have a pretty good leg up because they were high fit against the program parameters that would go forward, but still, there would need to be kind of a program process in order to evaluate them against that. Some of these idea submissions were, obviously had kind of project detail behind them. Some of them were just idea submissions. So this contemplates an extra step in the process after this at a program.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Bill, I'd suggest it's no harder than tax day to follow. That's what you've been busy with all day.
We're on the easy street now. We're on the downside. Yeah, I do think that I appreciate the hard work of the committee, and I think you guys have done a great job, and I appreciate your taking the time to go over this with us, because I think it's very helpful.
Good, yeah, and like John said, Bill, it's kind of hard with the amount of information we were given, with the number of submissions we were given, to really drill down and give extremely explicit recommendations just due to that fact. We had a lot of questions around submissions. If it's this, well, yes, we agree with that. And could there be a lower amount allocated for a project? If they requested 50 million, would it be feasible to give them 20 based on the scope and size of their submission? So there were a lot of variables. We tried to be as flexible and specific as we could be without being limiting, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to go to the next one then? So this might help a little bit as well. So we looked at these and rated them as high, medium, or low in terms of fit with the guiding principles, the impact and the feasibility. So yes. So example of high fit areas have been listed, and you'll see at the bottom there the funding envelopes that we recommended. And again, this, I think, and Robin, you can add to this as well. I think a lot of this was, again, where we made some assumptions. Each panelist was looking at each idea and maybe making some assumptions about where these would fit, but this is the consensus of where our panel came together and rated these 8 areas with the funding envelopes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, together, so these 8 programs offer the opportunity to improve health outcomes, expand access to quality childcare, and increase service utilization for those high needs communities. And one of the things I do want to mention as well is we were very cognizant of making sure that we touched all corners of the state. We wanted to make sure that we helped all communities in every area. And that was definitely a consideration as well. So as Kansas as a whole struggles with affordability and accessibility of health and education services, ranging from mental health to early childhood services, this investment portfolio addresses what we felt were the most pressing needs of communities across the state. With that, I'd like to thank you again for your time today and for your hard work in this process. I know you all have to pull it all together and look at all submissions across all panels. Hopefully this will be helpful to you, and Robin and I are happy to answer any questions that we can.
Oh, Chair Erickson, Chair Chadwick, thank you both so much. Tremendous amount of work and thought has gone into this, and we're all very grateful for your leadership and for the work of all the members of the advisory panel. Let's open it up for questions and comments from the executive committee. Yeah, Mr. Rolfe.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for your work on this, and I appreciate it. Clearly, with the more submissions, the harder the lift that you guys had to do. I just want to make sure I'm clear on a couple things. So when it comes to food or hunger or food insecurity, that was the community gardens, the access to healthy food, was that what floated above? Was there anything else you guys looked at in regards to that? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. And I would say that is probably the most specific, although when we look at providing access and centralized support in some of those other social service programs we talked about, that would also include addressing food insecurity through those programs as well. But definitely, I'll be honest, that community garden really piqued a lot of interest in that area in food insecurity and helping with that at a local level.
Yeah, I would just echo what Senator Erickson said, that in the community resource programs, especially those dealing with homelessness, many of those programs addressed food insecurities, just not in a specific program like the community gardens did.
Okay, and then a follow-up question. So on mental health, I assume that's included in the telehealth adoption piece, or were you thinking that's primarily physical health?
I think it could be used for either. The projects that we proposed be funded would be more about platforms and equipment so that the telehealth services could be delivered regardless of the specific content, whether that would be physical health, mental health.
Okay, and I assume mental health then is in the health facilities program expansion, targets supportive housing, employment. that would all fit. I mean, I know it's kind of gray in some of this, but in both of those as knowing that's a priority in the state.
Yes, the behavioral health would fit in both the supported housing, supported employment, as well as expansion of services. The thing that we really focused on from the beginning was that it seems across our communities in the state, we really have facility expansion needs because we lack capacity just due to the physical constraints of the buildings in many places. And then the second big constraint was workforce.
Thank you both.
I would echo that. And I would also say that mental health and the needs that we know in many areas, the talk was, it was an issue before the pandemic really ramped up some of the issues that we were having. Mental health was, I think, at the forefront of everyone's mind in behavioral health, in education, and how it impacts every facet of the submissions that we looked at.
Thank you.
Other questions from the executive committee?
Can you hear me, Lieutenant Governor?
Yes, go ahead, President Masterson.
One of them, my first question is follow up on Bill's question, and this might even be to John. Was the list of specific projects what we had presented to us on like the pre-read, where there were some pages that had some specific projects and had like number of ratings? Is that what you were referring to as the presentation of us there for the?
Yes, it'd be the ones where on the left-hand side was the program parameters, and on the right-hand side showed projects and showed the number of high fit votes they'd gotten.
Yeah, okay. I want to make sure I was looking at the same sheet. And thank you to the panelists too. Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman. Was there any discussion around, that education's a tough one here because we spend a lot of education money in just the underlying budget, and we've learned money doesn't always equal better outcomes. But when you're talking to curriculum type ideas, like the Math Nation, which seems to be very effective, were there any discussions with like Department of Education on what they can do with some of the resources they have or the ARPA dollars they have, the dedicated funds that they receive separate from us on?
Yeah, thank you for that question, President Masterson. I will say that there was talk about that. I don't know, and personally, I did not have any discussion. It was referenced that K-12 and higher ed did receive a substantial amount of money. Therefore, we chose to prioritize more of the early childhood, child care area for this funding stream. So it was referenced, it was talked about. But to my knowledge, we did not engage them in how they were using their funds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Other questions? Okay, well, again, Chairwoman Erickson and Chadwick, we want to thank you both for your leadership here. We're really grateful to all the advisory panel members for the work that's gone into this, and it's very good work. So thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it back over to John.
Sure. And I'd like to thank both of the chairs as well as all the panel members in that panel, because one observation is that they had a super broad area, a couple areas to look at, and they did an amazing job of, no pun intended, taking a scholarly understanding where they felt there were some maybe sweet spots and high leverage opportunities that, weren't being addressed elsewhere. So they did yeoman's work in terms of thinking through where to prioritize, as well as evaluating all of those idea submissions. Now, the next panel, Economic Revitalization, had probably by far the broadest scope of all in terms of all of the areas that could look at. And once again, Knight's chairs, as well as the panelists, did an incredible job, wrapping their arms around it and having to think about where to really set priorities. So, and I know all of those folks, as with all the panels, are super busy. No one's on these panels because they don't have much to do in their day job. So just say up front, really appreciate all the time that put into this. With that, I will now hand it over to Representative Tarwater and Tian Nguyen, who are the co-chairs of the Economic Revitalization panel.
Hi, guys. Thank you for the opportunity today. Thank you, John, for all your work on this, and staff. A lot of effort went into running these meetings. It was kind of like herding cats. I want to thank you for putting such wonderful minds and great business minds on this committee, because I feel like we've got a lot done, and I feel like we can do quite a bit more for you if you'll allow it. So we'll start off with the presentation here on the first slide. We wanted to try to use these funds to address a few issues: significant out-migration, that we severe work shortage of workers, and then housing is another issue that we wanted to focus on, or at least address, on how to keep these employees in the rural areas of Kansas. We identified some areas of improvement that we wanted to focus on. Business growth and innovation in emergency and core industries of the future. We want to support entrepreneurs in that and innovation. Of course, the workforce attracts, retains talent needed to grow economy. We need a good workforce in order to bring more businesses here. We're bringing businesses here pretty successfully at this point, but our biggest concern is now, how do we staff those companies? We've got a lot of proposals out there that could bring thousands and thousands of jobs to Kansas. And so we wanted to make sure that we focus some of these monies and some of this effort on making sure that we can provide a good, solid workforce with high-paying wages that would help our students that graduate stay in Kansas. As you know, about 62% of the students that graduate college in Kansas leave the state, at least for a while. And so we were wanting to make sure that we can help create jobs that would be exciting for these people, for these students to stay in the state of Kansas. And we wanted to make sure that we address at least the building and infrastructure and housing that it would take to keep them satisfied in the state of Kansas. Switch to the next slide. You've kind of gone through, you're all very familiar with the process. We wanted to focus on industry growth, talent, because of the significant out-migration. We wanted to focus on the needs of upskilling and reskilling to fill our current open jobs. Innovation is certainly required. We wanted to make sure that we stayed on the cutting edge of technology. We are 38th in startup for job creation and in startup companies. And that is a concern that we had. We wanted to focus on supporting new entrepreneurials to take the place of some of these businesses that are leaving and dying in the state of Kansas just because they're no longer needed. We did talk a little about water and infrastructure, but we ruled most of those submissions out. We did this because there were a lot of local municipalities that received federal funds that chose not to focus on these issues. They also have the avenue of funding these issues with property tax or bonding. We decided we would probably stay away from water and infrastructure at this time because there's also more federal programs coming out to help them in the future. The last one is tourism. We rank in the bottom 5 states. As you know, there's no beaches here. There's no mountains. We do have some professional sports in the area, though, that are a big draw. And so we talked about that quite a bit in our big opportunity that we have to bring the World Cup to the state of Kansas and Missouri up here in the Johnson County area, and also to play off of it in Wichita. as you already heard, we had over 400 submissions. That's the next slide. And we won't spend too much time on this. This is kind of how they broke down, that were sent to us as we progress. You can go to the next slide. As we progress through several different meetings, we had a lot of background. We received a lot of background information, and we talked about some of the things that we thought were most important. And so we wanted to make sure that our investments were catalytic and transformational for the state of Kansas. We wanted to jumpstart growth and innovation in our core industries that we currently have. We wanted to make sure that we focused on those to grow those, especially the ones that have high-paying jobs and strong futures. And we wanted to try to focus on new emerging industries as we move forward, so that we can keep our students, as I discussed earlier, in the state of Kansas. On the housing, we do need to address shortage and quality problems. The committee kind of struggled with simply giving people down payments for housing if they couldn't afford it, and the median income type housing that we discuss sometimes in appropriations. Didn't really see how someone that would qualify for down payment assistance making $80,000 a year as an individual, if that person doesn't know how to budget his or her income enough to save for a down payment, I don't know that the state has a place giving that person money to put down on a house that they may not be able to sustain because they don't know how to budget. That was a concern, along with the concern that simply throwing money into housing will certainly continue to inflate housing, and it will also it would be certain to increase construction costs for all Kansans. And so we decided to focus more on innovative solutions to that industry. And you'll see that as we progress through here. We wanted to deprioritize things that would be in a limited scope or that wouldn't stick around for a long period of time. Things like premium pay or bonuses, as they would be one-time funding. We didn't see that would be a long-term and catalytic investment that we should make. We also wanted to phase out or rule out any industry or institution that might already have received funding from the federal government, from the state government, and the typical appropriation process. A lot of these submissions came from people that are in the appropriations room every day or have lobbyists in there. And we wanted to try to give other Kansans a shot at innovation and development. There was base funding. We discussed that. A lot of these submissions went to both us and to base. And for example, if you had a proposal that came to us, they would ask for, say, $100 million as an example. If it went to base, it would have $75 million because there was a 25% match requirement or whatever that was. And so people were able to find money on matching, which kind of opened our eyes to all of these asks to see that we're certain that a lot of these asks that we're going to put forth are scalable, and we would like the opportunity to address that as we move forward or as you move forward with your decisions. We wanted to make sure we had sufficient alternative funding or make sure that they didn't have ulterior funding. And I already discussed the local government issue. Next slide. We did want to point out that this committee is making recommendations today based on kind of a first glance. We do stand ready to drill down on these opportunities and request additional information so that we can help eliminate or scale down the ask. As I stated earlier, we think that a lot of these asks were asked because the money was there. We realize that there's not so much money there now, and we do stand ready to help you. And we would request that we would be able to request more information from these individual companies to help scale down their asks so that we can help more of them than not. It would be helpful for the committee to see business plans from some of these submissions to make sure that we think that they're sound investments and that they will succeed. And we would like to know more about some of the investors and see what their previous projects have done, whether they failed or have done well. You can go to the next slide. Again, this is just a quick glance at how the process went. We had 410 submissions, and we stepped it down and then stepped it down to a total of 24 submissions, and we'll go through those here in a moment. Go to the next slide. This is kind of the idea, filtering process and the phases we went through. Some of these meetings were more than one meeting. A couple of them were 2 or 3 meetings. And now we're on the final step of recommending a portfolio to the Spark Committee. And that's just kind of how we narrowed it down. These are the stakeholders that you guys assigned to this committee, and I couldn't thank you more. You gave us some of the greatest minds in EcoDevo and small business, large business, entrepreneurs, and many sectors were represented in the of the economy, including agriculture. And so we do appreciate the fact that you gave us so many great people, and these great people are willing to take the next step with you if you'd like to get more information and further the process. Next slide. Here, this is basically how our 24 submissions that we're going to suggest broke down. We had 6 in programs to grow and support industries. That's our current industries and future industries. We had 3 involving entrepreneurial ecosystems and innovation. We had 1 for talent pipeline. It was a small ask, so we considered that. We considered 2 worker training programs, and building economic growth enablers. We had 12 of those in housing development and other enablers. Go to the next one. Okay, before we start going through each individual area, are there any questions to this point? Or team, do you have anything to add to this point?
I do not have anything to add, Representative Tarwater.
Are there any questions from the executive committee before they move on? Okay, Mr. Chair, let's keep rolling.
Okay, great. We'll be efficient. Programs to grow and support industries. We had 6 recommendations that we'd like to make, and I can go through those briefly and quickly. The first one was from the Latino Professional Association, and that's Eastside Business and Economic Development. It's for Latino professionals, and it was an ask of $1.3 million. We felt like it wasn't that big of an ask, and that it helps them with helps Spanish-speaking people start brand new businesses and grow. And it seemed like at least on the surface, as a good opportunity for the Topeka area and the Latino population. And so we wanted to make sure that you guys, we highlighted that for you and that you took a close look at that, and we'll be willing to help you with that. The next one is establish cybersecurity. The next 2 are in cybersecurity. The first one is Enterprise KC. The ask was $78 million. It is a cybersecurity field that is evergreen, and these investors here have a tremendous amount of success in the past with other programs. We especially liked that this was more of an evergreen program as they started new businesses in cybersecurity and they grew, and there were revenues that came back to the investors. They would then be able to invest in more and more companies. And so it was an evergreen process in an industry that we think that Kansas should certainly focus on. And we wanted to make sure that you saw that we pointed that out, and that cybersecurity was very important to the committee. And that would be also, we lumped in the Groover Labs Cyberlink, because they're cybersecurity as well. Much smaller ask, much smaller opportunity, but we did want to focus on the cybersecurity. The next one is the next generational digital factory for classified aerospace production. This is a Spirit Aerosystems program. Very high paying jobs, technical in nature, classified positions with for working on federal defense programs. It is a huge growing area in aviation. Kansas is the world leader in aviation. However, we are losing jobs in aviation while surrounding states, Oklahoma and Alabama, are growing leaps and bounds. And so this would be a great opportunity, we think, to grow not only the aviation industry, but a Kansas company, Spirit Aerosystems. They're in these other states and they're adding jobs in the other states. It would be good to see Kansas add aviation positions. And we feel like these are very high paying positions and we could certainly grow this industry in Kansas. Jumping around in my notes here. The next one is repositioning South Central Kansas small business for the new normal. This is sevenfold by Hutton. Most of you are familiar with the Hutton Group, and they have tremendous amounts of success in South Central Kansas and all across Kansas, really. And we couldn't think of a better opportunity. It's a small ask, and they would help small businesses in South Central Kansas with business plans, rethink their business plans to become more current with how things work in today's world. It is also another one of those projects that are evergreen and they can continue to help more and more Kansas companies start and grow. And the last one on this particular one is the Kansas Hydroponic Partnership. We spoke about this briefly and we weren't sure about the University of Kansas being involved in it. I did hear from the University of Kansas. They are highly interested in this. Pat Roberts is behind this, and I got a few notes on it here. Let me hold those up. It's going to be built on 240 acres. It's a 50-acre building. Interior growth. It's a hydroponic type organic growth for leafy vegetables. And like I said, Pat Roberts is deeply involved in it. And it'll be a research opportunity with Kansas State. And it will provide at least 120 agricultural engineering and research jobs in the Gardner area. And I think it would be a good opportunity. And they have committed to giving you more information, better decision on that. And that will be coming soon. Those were the 6 that we had under this particular programs to grow and support industries. Tian might have something to add on that.
I think you covered it all, Representative Tarwater.
Would there be any questions on this particular category or any of those submissions?
Any questions from the executive committee on this category? All right, let's keep going.
Okay, we can go to the next one. Let's see here. This is innovation and ecosystems for entrepreneurs. Kansas National Security Innovation and Bio Innovation and Sustainability Centers. This is the KU Innovation Park. I think most of you are aware that they're working on this project. It is kind of an interesting deal where they pair up the professors that do research with actual young entrepreneur business people that can start companies. One of the things KU Innovation Park has figured out is that although professors are very good at research and getting research opportunities and grants, they're not necessarily the best business people. And if they can pair them up with business people and they're building out wet lab space to help grow these companies, they have had some pretty great success. They create high paying jobs in several companies already. This would be for, this ask would be to finish phase 5 of the build out, and then they would sustain this particular build out would sustain the continued build out of the business park with phase 6 and 7. And so it would be a one-time investment that would grow research opportunities in the state of Kansas at Kansas University, and team up with young entrepreneurs to grow businesses. The other one is the Network for Growth, harnessing the power of Kansas entrepreneurs. This is a network of over 600 nonprofit partners and community organizations. They build entrepreneurship ecosystems all across the state of Kansas. It is another one of those evergreen opportunities. And then No More Business Incubator and Commercial Kitchen. This is a smaller ask. Is for food entrepreneurs and another opportunity for our Hispanic population that is growing. I think it's around 13% now. And so those are the 3 that we wanted to bubble up for innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystems. And Tin might have something to add.
Representative Tarwater, you're doing such a great job. I have nothing to add on my notes here.
All right.
So could I ask a question about the Kansas National Security Innovation and Bio Innovation Sustainability Centers?
Yeah, please go ahead.
That's a KU funded thing, our KU thing. Is that part of the already included in the money that the legislature has set aside out of the state, the fiscal recovery funds? You know,
not to my knowledge. I think we funded other things with Kansas University in regards to, I think, help them to build out their stadium and hotel area. But I don't know that this was addressed. I don't think that this is actually part of the university. They do team up with the university, though.
Okay. Thanks. Does anybody else have any information on that? I don't know what was funded out of those by the legislature.
Mr. Pickert, we'll see if staff can follow up on that and get it to the executive committee here this week.
Okay.
Other questions from executive committee members on the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem category?
Yeah, I will say, hey, Bill, there was a one pager. It looks kind of like, I don't know how well you can see this, that broke down where all the funding has gone up to this point. The higher ed, some of those higher ed ones were generic. I think KU, they call it economic development. That's not this National Center of Innovation, Bioinnovation campus. So I would echo what Representative Tarwater said. I don't believe this project's included. They also partner with WSU on the Health Science Center, which there's $25 million for that. Those would both be designated around projects involving University of Kansas.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Yeah, things changed pretty quickly through the appropriation process, and we tried to do the best we could to make sure that we weren't duplicating any of the programs that were already being funded.
Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, talent pipeline programs. We did receive several of these. Most of them regarded individual companies. Let's see, this is number 10. Have to do with mental health, and so it kind of caught the attention of one of the eyes on the committee. And so we made this recommendation because mental health is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. We did address this at the state level as far as pay raises for those that work in our mental health institutions for the state. This is a private workforce development company, and we thought it might be a good thing to at least take a close look at this as you guys made your decision. And that's the only talent pipeline program that we have identified. Most of the others were already funded through the colleges and all the appropriations process. Tien, anything?
I'm good.
Okay, any questions? All right, we can move on to the next slide. Worker training programs. We provide 2 of these drones across Kansas. I'm not sure if you guys are all familiar with Bob Brock. Bob Brock is our director of aviation for the state of Kansas. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and he knows every single thing there is to know about drones. We have a tremendous opportunity with him at the helm here. The state of Kansas has made strides in drone production, drone flight areas. We're one of the few states that can file a FAA flight plan for a drone with non-line of sight because of the work that Bob Brock has done. And there's we're just on the beginnings of what we can do with drones, and it would be great to see more and more manufacturers of drones come to Kansas and work with our great aviation companies that we already have, or expand some of the aviation companies that we have into the drone business. And we just think it's a good match. The second one was the GWO training facility. With the growth of renewable energy, there's a tremendous amount of workforce needs in this industry all across the nation. And, as renewable energy grows in the state of Kansas, we want to make sure that we can grow our own workforce to work on those energy sources. And so we thought that would be a good opportunity. It was a lower ask, and we think it would be good to get more information on that. Any questions on that, or Tien, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to add on the GWO one. I think so they're kind of like the unofficial governing body of wind energy from a international perspective. There's 24 centers that are certified by GWO. And so if we have the ability to partner, I believe their proposal talks about partnering with Cali County to build a facility and provide some of the skill training. I think that would be good for us, especially in our state, Western Kansas, particularly with all the wind farms we have there, but our ability to service them. I mean, I know we have, there were wind service companies here in our state that service them all across the U.S. So it would be good to have that training available here in our great state so that we can continue to grow that sector.
Any questions from the executive committee members on these worker training programs? Okay, keep moving.
Thank you, sir. And Lieutenant Governor, I would add that we do have a packet of information that we'll email to you. I think it's 58 pages long or 50 some pages long that has all of these submissions detailed out with all the answers. And so, I'm just barely touching on a lot of these subjects. A lot of these were bubbled up from other committee members that know a lot more about this than these things than I do. And so we'll get you all of that information so that you can go through it as time allows. We'll move on to building improvement and construction. I spoke briefly on this earlier as far as, building houses and giving people down payments. And if we didn't learn anything from all these funds being put out by the federal government into people's hands and spent, if you look at the inflation that it caused, we're doing the same thing in the housing market. We're doing the same thing in the construction market, construction materials. I mean, I can tell you a 2x4 that I used to buy a year and a half ago was $2 or less. And over the last year and a half, it's been as high as $12 or $14 for the same 2x4. just because of supply and demand and all of the money that's out there that people are using and spending that was never their money, but now they're just blowing it on rebuilding their own houses and remodeling and buying new houses, building new houses. And we're just out of workers and we're out of supplies. And so the more we go down that road, the farther we go down that road, I think the worse we're going to make it. And so we wanted to focus, as I said earlier, on more innovative things. And let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead by one slide. Let me.
You want me just to go, since you already set it up?
Go ahead and do that.
Yep.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that one. Then we'll go back to the previous one. My apologies. And so these are the housing development and rehab. The first submission was the 1,800 units of high quality workforce housing in over 3 years with the city of Salina. This was a $65 million request. One of the members on the committee wanted to put this forward. When you do the math as far as the 1,800 units, it's $36,000 a unit the state of Kansas would be paying in order to help build this apartment complex. It's something that he wanted to put forward, so we put it in here. You should take a close look at it. I guess Salina has, Lieutenant Governor will be able to tell you, we've expanded several companies there and brought a new one in, and I believe we're bringing another one in. And so there's no place for people to live. This was one of the few areas that we went ahead and said it might be a good idea to at least take a look at something like this. The others on here, the 3D housing project was put forth by Lana Duvall. She had a lot of great ideas under this housing issue. Rather than build, since we can't really build low-end housing right now because of construction costs and construction material costs, Lana has incentivized builders to build higher-end housing, which is profitable for them and doable for them. And the people that live there are purchasing these houses and freeing up the lower end of the market for new people to move in. And so we thought those were some pretty neat ideas. One of the things that she brought forth with this 3D housing projects, it's a lower way or a quicker way to build houses, a more efficient way to build houses. It is cutting edge and something new that could come to the state of Kansas. And so there was one other 3D printer, housing 3D printer, and we bubbled them both up for you to look at. And then the other two, the Kansas Modular Affordable Housing Initiative is, another way that we could build houses quickly. We can build them in factories, move them out to rural Kansas, and put them together. And that's the same as the Waffle Creek factory to manufacture precast concrete panels. So that's the kind of the road we went down to help address the housing development issues rather than just throwing money at the problem. Any questions on that, or Tandy, I want to add anything?
I'm good, thank you.
You didn't want to
Questions
do your
from
Cadillac analogy?
Executive Committee on Housing Development.
All right, let's go back to the previous slide then. Okay, building improvements and construction. We started off with the Kansas Advanced Simulation Center. Aerospace Innovation Ramp, let's see. I think that came up because it was a K-State initiative teaming up with the city of Salina, and it trains the pilots. We have a pilot shortage all across the nation, and we can the more that we can put out in the state of Kansas, the more people we can get jobs, high-paying jobs that would be based in Kansas. And again, it's in the aviation industry. The next three, I'm going to skip down to the smart tech for automated warehousing, and that is Envision Inc. It is a new product for them, a new cutting edge, innovative product for them. Most of you are aware of who Envision is. They help the blind people work and find jobs. They train companies on how to work with the blind. They're nationally renowned, and they do a lot of really good work. They have a product or a wide variety of products that they currently sell, and they're pretty maxed out on. Give them a new cutting edge product to sell and help other businesses employ more blind people. And so we thought this was a pretty neat way to spend the Spark money to further that business along. The other three have to do with the soccer initiative in the state of Kansas in the World Cup. And Tian knows more about this than anyone that I've talked to. Even the people that I've met with Sporting KC. And so I thought I'd turn it over for him to talk about the opportunities that Kansas could have in the World Cup and the youth soccer and the demand for, or the demographics, I guess, that it could help keep Kansas in Kansas. I'll turn it over to Tian.
Thank you, Representative Tarwater. So I'll just go from top down based on the list, the idea submissions here. First is a professional soccer stadium. That soccer stadium would house, that's in Wichita, Kansas, our largest city, a $25 million ask. I guess, allow me to back up. I should be transparent up front here. This is actually a submission from my group, and that's why I know a lot of the details about this, but since it's soccer related, be able to speak to the Sporting KC ones as well. But the professional soccer stadium would be a $50 million soccer stadium. We're asking $25 million from the state, with the city and county earmarking and matching those funds. The private sector themselves will spend about $15 to $20 million to bring the team here and operate that. That doesn't include the mixed use development and dollars that will be needed to invest for the mixed use of that. For those that are familiar with Wichita, we are looking at a riverfront legacy master plan that's north of $1 billion. And hopefully this project, if approved and received the funding from the state, city, and county, along with the private sector, would help jumpstart that economic development for the largest city in our state. Going on to the youth sports and also soccer stadium entertainment district, both of this was submitted from Sporting KC, our professional team in the KCK area. We have a unique opportunity here. North America is going to be hosting the World Cup along with Canada and Mexico, with the majority of the sites being stateside for 2026. And this is the #1 growing sport in demographics for Gen Z, millennials, and also the Latino base. And so you think about the workforce. Earlier, Representative Tarwater mentioned that we don't have beaches and mountains, which isn't obvious. So what do we do for overall quality of life? And having sporting events and venues like this help address those issues for workforce and work retention. We should do further due diligence on what this entertainment district looks like, so that we can be more competitive with winning one of the host cities for the World Cup. Along with, if any of you have children or in youth sports at all, one example I could tie it to is the Stryker Complex here in Wichita, Kansas. Let's just put things into perspective. Stryker Complex in the Wichita Sports Forum, which is in the northeast corridor of our city, they've done such a great job with jump starting and driving traffic to northeast Wichita that there's been tons of economic development and growth there. When you talk to the managers of those two properties, they'll tell you the local Target, the local Cabela's, literally have a meeting with them every week to find out what events are happening, so they can staff their team appropriately along with the hotels around that. So it kind of just gives you an idea of the general economic development that goes into sports from youth and professional. With the committee's permission, we would love to do further due diligence on this to deep dive further. The dollar amounts are being asked and what matching funds are being provided from the private sector and the other municipalities that these improvements will be made on. That's all I have, Representative Tarwater.
Yeah, okay. So I would add that the World Cup is not just one game or one event. It's several games and several events strung along a longer period of time. It would be equivalent to several Super Bowls coming to the Kansas area. Not to mention the fact that the last time the United States hosted the World Cup was just the very next year. We started all our professional leagues in the United States because of all the demand that we got out of having the World Cup just in the United States. And so if we were able to bring that to Kansas itself, that would be pretty incredible.
If I can add, now that you brought it up, another great addition would be is if you look at Columbus, Ohio, they've really carved themselves out to where they're hosting national games. They have their own professional MLS team, and so they've really said, hey, we're going to put our stake and say that we're going to be a professional soccer town. And I think our state has the opportunity to do that and replicate that as well, since we have such a strong presence in Kansas City already.
There was one other item that did not make the list that I wanted to point out for tourism. In Atchison, Kansas, we have the Amelia Earnhardt Museum. I know that Lieutenant Governor was just recently there. This is a pretty neat. It's really unique because Amelia Earnhardt grew up in Atchison, Kansas, and they have a replica of her plane, the only other airplane that is like it in the nation or anywhere really. And people will come from all over the nation. They'll fly into this airport to see this museum, and so it would be a draw to bring people in from other states, and they have an opportunity to build out that area as an entertainment area and a restaurant area, so people can fly in, go to the museum, get a bite to eat, and spend money in Kansas. They'll bring money from other states. Also, it is a tremendous STEM opportunity for all the schools in the area. They currently draw already with just the airplane. They draw from hundreds of miles away, people coming in for field trips to see Amelia Earnhardt's airplane. And they have a $5 million ask that I think that they're already having some success with wielding that down. They're also, I think that we could, if we got more information, we could get more of a local match or more of a national match and kind of wield that ask down. But the things that they are planning to do with that money are real incredible as far as teaching the kids, our area children, STEM activities. And so I think it would be a good, it didn't make this list for some reason. It was on my notes. I didn't bring it up when we had the meeting, but I think it would be important for you all to take a look at that, or we can take a look at how to do that, how to help that museum in the appropriations process. So we can go to the next. Does anyone have any questions on that slide before we move on?
Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay. Other infrastructure enablers, just a couple of more things that kind of were, we thought were catalytic in nature. The catalyzed circular economy within rural Kansas by deploying scalable high-tech infrastructure to expand regenerative agriculture industry while increasing soil health and water use efficiency. It's a company called Prairie Char Inc. And this is a great way, a new way, seems great. I had a couple of my friends at the State House that are farmers take a look at this information. They think that this company is onto something. It's cutting edge, and it has to do with nutrients in the soil and manure and a new type of fertilizer that would be a lot less expensive than what they're currently doing. As you're all aware, any of you that are in agriculture, the input costs have gone up tenfold in the last year or so. And so our farmers are suffering as far as trying to get their crops to even start growing. And we think that this company might be one of the answers, and it might be a good idea, or it is a good idea, to at least take a look at and see if we can help this company grow in the state of Kansas. So we would like you to take a close look at Prairie Char Inc.'s ask, and that will be in the submission that we bring to you. The other one is air cargo apron expansion at Wichita Eisenhower National Airport. The MRO industry is in aviation is a growing one. A lot of companies, as Lieutenant Governor will be able to tell you, are looking for new hubs to overhaul their airplanes. This is an opportunity that we have. We did fund some of this in appropriations process through the NIAR at Wichita State. But this is an opportunity to take several airplanes that are just sitting there and convert them to FedEx and Amazon haulers. Rather than hauling people, they could haul packages. There's a huge demand for it, and a long list of airplanes that are just sitting in the desert waiting to be 777s to be exact, to be converted into cargo airplanes, and we could corner that market in the state of Kansas. So that's another thing that we would like you to take a close look at. We did fund some of it in the appropriations process, so it's one of those asks that might be scalable. Any questions on that, or Tina, did you have anything to add to that?
I do not.
Any questions from the executive committee on infrastructure enablers? Okay.
A clarification, Representative Tarwater, that air cargo apron expansion. So I know that I saw the NIAR work stuff go through and the bill. I thought the air cargo apron expansion was something that was necessary as the amount of commerce going in and out of the city through delivery, through Amazon, et cetera, has increased. UPS, FedEx, and for them to be able to get in those bigger airplanes, we're going to need to expand that apron. Am I missing that, or was I under misunderstanding? I may be wrong.
Yeah, you're right on. That's exactly what this part of it would do.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Parking space. Think of it as parking space, if you will.
For big airplanes.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay.
Okay, well, the rest is just kind of summary of what we just went over, and so we don't really need to cover this next two slides. We don't have anything else to add other than the fact that we are willing to work with you further. The committee does stand ready and willing to do the work for you. Rather than we'll be happy to turn it all over for you guys to dig through. But if you would give us the opportunity, we would certainly want to dig down into this for you and bring you more information on these particular asks and in a scalable nature so that we can do more of them and you can do some of the other ones as well.
Well, Chairman Tarwater, Chairman Wen, thank you both very much for your leadership on this committee, and want to thank all the advisory panel members for a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this. Let's open it up for questions from the executive committee members.
Lieutenant Governor, it's Ty.
Yeah, Mr. President.
So thank you guys, Mr. Chairman. Tim, thank you for putting this together. I think my question, since there's a lot here and you're willing to put in the work, I mean, the request was for 282. Obviously, that's a number we couldn't dedicate to this one area. I think I'd like to see your committee's recommendation for, I'm trying to put the numbers together, 300, 250, 200, what you would, as you work with these or look at these opportunities, some may be able to do with less or come up with better matches or prioritize, if you only had 200 to spend or 250 or 300, how you as an entity would prioritize that smaller amount.
Yeah, Mr. President, thank you for the question. And that's exactly what we talked about as we went into this. I met with some of the members that are on the committee, and then when we went through these, it was stated over and over again that it would be great to get more information. I think a lot of the companies that we have talked about today were listening, and several of them have already reached out and said that they can certainly come with a more scalable proposal, and so that we can scale some of these down and we can get more information and maybe even rule some of them out, because some of these might have been covered in the base awards that just happened. But our intent would be just to do just that, sir, to pare some of these down so that we could do more of them.
And did your committee as a whole kind of, from a priority standpoint, I mean, I think the executive committee seems most interested in those areas that would ignite the most catalytic long-term change, right? Or benefit to the state down to what can make things more efficient and create revenue for us. But you know, how did you guys prioritize that?
Tian?
Yes, Mr. President. We made a short list. We haven't, as a panel, didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole until you guys greenlighted our ability to go further to do further due diligence. It's hard to say, right? So, for example, one request from Sporting KC is $95 million. I don't think anybody in our panel would say that we were going to issue them $95, but we believe in the economic impact of that project. And so I hate saying this, but we just don't have enough information to prioritize what's going to be the greatest return. We were able to make this short list of these 24 submissions. And like Representative Tarwater said, with the committee's blessing, with us and along with state staff or whoever you guys designate, would love to do further due diligence on this. There's no reason why we can't cut this down to $250 to $300 million requests. If you look at it, there's probably 3 or 4 that are north of 50 million, and I can't see us providing them with that total request amount. So from a prioritization perspective, we've gotten down to this short list, but we wouldn't say, hey, here are our top 3. We just don't have enough information yet.
That's fair. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor Toland, this is Secretary Burns Wallace. I want to say to the committee, thank you so much. I know that just comparatively, you all had almost, in some cases, 3 times as many submissions as some of the other panels. So just following your work, you all met probably the most out of all of the different committees. So truly appreciative of that work. As we continue down this road, I do want to make sure that as we think about next steps, that we also keep in mind that and knowing the interest of various parties, particularly private parties and vendors, that we have to make sure that we also do this in a competitive and a compliant way. And so I would want to make sure that we are putting the necessary programming around it if we were to take any more steps around due diligence, just because both federal and state outline that we need to make sure that the process is competitive and compliant as we do move these funds forward. So just put that out there as we continue to think about our next steps across all of the committees, and particularly this one that has a lot of exciting
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for the statement or question. And yes, that's our intent would be to work with you, not for you. And of course, as the appropriation proviso stated, you know, it's up to the executive committee to make the appropriations under these dollars. And so our intent would be just to get you more information and scalability. And we've had several of the companies already reach out to us for the scalability. At that point, it's all your decision. You know, as the proviso states, it's up to the executive committee to do what they will.
Chairman Tarwater, question on the additional information that you would get. Would it just be on the 24, 25 projects that have been brought forward, or would it be on the whole body of proposals or ideas that were received?
Well, sir, we stand ready to and willing to do, you know, whatever you would like us to do. Like I said, you've put some real good business minds and EcoDevo minds on this committee. Our original intent would be to take these 24 submissions that we're talking about and drill down on them for you, make sure we get do a little bit more due diligence, make sure that the business plans are there, and these aren't just ideas that we're throwing money at. Then allow you guys to make your decisions as you would otherwise. Just take a little bit of work off your hands, because you've got a lot to go through with the other committees as well. We felt like the process took a long time to get to where we got. And we just didn't have enough time to make better decisions and better suggestions to you.
As Secretary Burns Wallace said, the volume that you all received outstripped any other committee, and a couple of them by 2 or 3 to 1. So we appreciate the magnitude of the lift that you had in front of you. Other questions from executive committee members?
Yeah, I have one.
Mr. Rolfe?
Yeah. So, several of us in the Wichita business community talked about some things, and one idea that came out of Wichita I didn't see on here that maybe you guys can speak to more broadly across the state, because I didn't see necessarily anywhere else. So, you're looking at some specific companies and some specific ideas that they're wanting to bring to market. We talked about investments like you talked about the Apron at Eisenhower that were in kind of a public thing like Jabara, where it helps with the business development around aerospace and things like that. I know it's been something we've been focused on prior to the pandemic down here. Is that did those ideas not filter through for a reason, or why did they get filtered out? Just out of curiosity. Was that clear as mud there?
Well, we included several of the aviation asks, and I can tell you that from at least what I can tell, the aviation industry is poised to take off, for lack of a better term. But we've worked over the last several years to add that aviation tax credit that the governor just signed. There were several of us that pushed on that for several years in order to get that through. And that will put Kansas back on the map. It will put us competitive for the jobs that we have lost over the last several years to Oklahoma and other states. We're matching what their programs are. And we're losing engineers and high paid positions right out of college. Our college graduates are going to other states to work in the aviation industry, and they're learning it here, at Kansas State and Kansas and Wichita State, and working with NIAR. Then they leave the state. And so we feel that aviation tax credit is an important first start. The governor just signed that. We've pieced together what we thought were the best opportunities in the aviation industry to expand and grow, especially the one with Spirit. It'll be really nice to see Spirit grow in Kansas, because they've been growing in other states. And now that we've made it a competitive environment and we can add that type of a high profile category to their production, I think that would be really neat. But John, if there's other issues you want us to look at in the aviation industry, I'm sure the panel would be happy to take a closer look. You're on mute.
Thank you very much for all your work too on this. I want to make sure I echo that. A yeoman's task and a heavy lift for sure. So, specifically, this is me being a private business guy and having, very little government experience. I want to ask this. So, like when you talk about Spirit, just as an example, what if this group moved that forward? What's that like? I know we've had a lot of conversations around procurement and all that. When you're talking about a private business, Secretary Burns Wallace just brought that up. Is that something then that you'd put out an RFP saying, someone who's willing to do this, and Textron has an opportunity to bid on that, and that's just one example. I mean, I know there's several that would kind of fit in that ilk. What's the process like for this committee? I really don't know where we go from here and what that looks like. And does anybody know what that looks like?
Well,
I know these ARPA dollars kind of a first time thing, so I don't really know what this looks like as we move from this step.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not my decision to make. But the way I read the proviso, it's up to the executive committee. So you guys would probably have to put together your own process of procurement if you're going to do that. But the ones that we bubbled forward were they were put forth by the companies that put forth, and everyone had an opportunity to put forth, their asks. I know that Textron did have, I do recall seeing one or two in there from them. And that would be something that you guys could take a look at as an executive committee before you made your decision.
Secretary Burns-Wallace, to Mr. Rolfe's point, can you explain precisely what does the U.S. Treasury require us to do here as it relates to procurement?
So both federal as well as our own state guidelines ensure that when we are awarding, whether it's a contract or grant dollars, that there needs to be a competitive process. And so therefore, we do need to be careful of identifying one-on-one projects that have not been through a competitive process. And so I think, as Mr. Rolfe has given an example, in some of these areas, the larger programmatic areas, if we are identifying that that is an area for funding, then there's an opportunity there to then take requests in. We need to be careful though, because the initial call through this process, and John Paralisi can also speak to this, was an idea submission. And so with that idea submission, it was a broader kind of ask. And so there are things that we did not ask. If you compare it, for instance, to the base process that just concluded, that was a clear grant award process where it was stated as a grant award process, and it defined all of which information would be necessary to make a grant award. And then the next step in the process is that the information as to how it was going to be evaluated is made available for that grant award process. And so, this group, this economic development group, as we lean into the areas that the advisory group identified as those high priorities, could, complement very well some of the work that was done with BASE in terms of that evaluation. I agree that the chairs are correct that additional information would be necessary before awards could be identified and made, but we would need to make sure that it was broadly made available in the categories that would be funded. And so I would personally have concern if it was just the 24 that were brought forward. And part of that is just making sure if there was additional information that came forward in any other way, that there was an opportunity for those to be assessed or evaluated as well. So those are just my initial thoughts. I know we have a little bit of ways to go on that process, but that just gives you some of my initial thoughts as we think about this area.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary. Other questions for our chairs from the executive committee? Yes, Mr. Rolfe.
Sorry, I wanted to dominate there. Thanks for the clarification and all that. So I'm learning on the fly here, so I appreciate everybody's patience with me. I appreciate your guys' willingness also to do more work. I think probably what makes sense to me, I'd love to hear the rest of the committee's thoughts on this, is do we, so now I haven't done the math yet on the revised version, as people, I like the phrase Representative Tarwater was using as far as bubbled up, the taking that total versus the 400 million that's left. Do we need to, would the next step be saying, hey, now that we've heard this, let's allocate 100 million towards this, 100 million towards this, 50 towards this, 150 million towards this, and then come back with a more specific target to have a group look at and validate, I just don't know. I'd love to hear the thoughts. I feel like it's probably time we need to grind on this a little bit, is my gut, because we've been sitting back as an executive committee while you guys have been doing so much hard work. But also, I'm just one member of 7 here. So whatever you guys are thinking, I'd love to spur that conversation on as far as what's next for us. Maybe you guys already have that figured out too. I don't know.
Thanks, Mr. Rolfe. And John Paralisi, could you remind me what are the numbers on the recommendations from the 4 committees totaling versus the 397 million that we have available?
Let me go back and reshare, because we actually put together at the end kind of a scorecard that included the amounts as well as the areas, so the funding envelopes. So let me go back into that.
I guess while you're pulling that up, this is maybe we need to focus on the economic revitalization stuff first before we move on to next steps. But knowing that they were willing to do more information, I didn't know if we should pivot to that. So I apologize if I'm moving us in the wrong direction.
No, I think this is an important direction, and okay, looks like we got our slide up. Okay, John, can you take us through this?
Sure. So connectivity, efficiency, modernization, health and ed. Although the idea submissions, some were identified as high fit and helped kind of formulate the thinking around the funding envelopes, they still did show it in terms of funding envelopes. So if you look at for those three panels, the minimum ask in total across those is 380 and the target is 658. The economic revitalization, there were no kind of programmatic funding envelopes, just that total. So that was and that is against the 397 million. So obviously some trade-offs would need to be made. And then so the rest of kind of the scorecard-y type slides actually shows, okay, here's generally what each one was looking at, what the asks look like, and then goes into a little bit more detail as well as, okay, here's what's in those asks, just so you know the specific areas and the makeup of them. So basically, so that the Spark Executive Committee kind of knows the building blocks it has to work with in terms of looking at these, and it can make decisions to go with entire programs or think of, go back to the panels and ask if some programs can shrink. So for instance, broadband infrastructure, could they go below the minimum on their ask? So that was the intent of that. So our thoughts path forward was for the Spark Executive Committee members to kind of have a chance to kind of absorb everything they've heard and then begin to think through what process they wanted to have around decision making.
Okay, that's helpful, John. Thank you. John Rolfe.
So did I do the math right? That was between 900 million and $1.2 billion or something like that? Is that the range there? Or?
Yep. And the thought all along was always, well, on the high side on the targets, right? And the thought all along was for the Spark Executive Committee to have more things to look at than funds it had, right? So that you could make trade-offs. Okay. The saying went, when I say yes to something, I want to know what I'm saying no to.
Yep, I remember that.
I will stop sharing now.
Lieutenant, this Ty.
Yes, Mr. President.
I mean, looking back now, I was a little worried. We were trying to shove 13 million into 400 million. But if you look at, if you're going to the minimums from the three prior panels, 380, and then you heard Chairman Todwater, maybe it was 10, say, they could push into 250, 300. That's now you're down around 600 and some million, right? We're looking at something that I think we should engage these panels to dig a little further into their recommendations. And I think it seems at least more manageable or possible at this point than it did when I first looked at the gross ask. It's a thought.
By the way, the other thing we didn't know was whether any funds would come back from that UI allocation. So the thought was that the Spark Executive Committee might always actually have some sort of a bench of things that could potentially be funded too down the line.
But Don, is the more information we get from the federal government on that UI trust fund, I don't anticipate anything coming back, and I would anticipate that there would be a bill in the future. I think we'll use every bit of the $500 million that was allocated. We're waiting on BKD to come back with that audit, of course, but from where Kansas is ranked right now as far as improper payments and fraud, we're leaps and bounds ahead of any other state. And so, I wouldn't count on any of those funds, and I would count on it. I would count on a future appropriation to help fund that trust fund from all the fraud and improper payments over the last 2 years.
Ty again, I'd interject also in the same way that the legislature, appropriated some of the spark funding. Looking at the value of these projects, we're not necessarily limited to that dollar amount left. That's the limit to the ARPA potentially and whatever, and additionally what may come back. But if we find there's $600 million worth of worthwhile investment, that doesn't necessarily mean that can't happen in this near term.
Yeah, I would liken your process to the appropriations process. I know that the appropriations process in the last couple of weeks appropriated a lot of these funds without going through the procurement process. I think that they were worthwhile spends, and I think that they worked with as many people as they could to choose what they decided, where they decided to put those funds. And I would imagine that some more of that might be happening over the next couple of days as we get our revenue estimates and redo the budget. Some of these items might be taken care of in that process, and so as we move forward, we'll keep all that in mind. But I would imagine your process to be very similar to the appropriations process, where the Spark Committee is empowered to choose individual projects and go ahead and go with them. So I would think that the more information we can get you, the better.
I think we certainly all agree on that. It's very important that we've got adequate information and that from a process perspective, we are as transparent as we can be about how we evaluate proposals. And, as has been said many times, if we say yes to something, we say no to something else, and we need to be able to have a defensible process on how we've done that. So I know that's how we're all trying to approach this. So we've got about 5 minutes to go with our meeting today. I do want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for Mr. Paralisi to kind of wrap us up. We are transitioning here because we brought on John to do a job, and he has done that with aplomb. And we're incredibly grateful to John for his work in shepherding these 4 advisory panels through this process. There's been, I don't know, what'd you say, John, 26 different meetings, I believe, across those panels, and just a lot of balls in the air that you've juggled so well. And we're certainly very grateful for that, and just wanted to turn the mic over to you.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that. The one thing I say I learned across this process is not only from a strategic standpoint, there are a lot of great opportunities to think about for Kansas. A number of them could be, catalytic and game-changing over the long term. The other thing, and this might sound a little trite, but I really mean this, having had the chance to work with all the people that I got a chance to work with, whether it's the excellent people who supported the process or the chairs or the panelists, I have a very positive outlook for the future Kansas because they're all great people. And, at the end of the day, that's probably the greatest asset that a state can have, right? It's the people, and when they can work together to kind of help define, a better future and build towards that. So it's been an honor for me to be involved in this process. So thank you very much for, letting me help out for a bit.
Well, we're certainly grateful to you, John. Thank you so much. And so I believe what our next step is going to be is, as an executive committee, we need to digest what's been presented both on Friday and here today across these 4 committees. There's been a lot of information that's come pretty quickly. And so we need to rapidly make our way through what we've been presented and get a meeting on the books here for shortly so that we can take our next steps going forward. So look for more information to come out here. But in the meantime, everybody, please make sure that you've read your packets and that we're taking advantage of the expertise of these committees, as Chairman Tarwater mentioned earlier, and Chairwoman Erickson. Everybody wants to be helpful here. There's a wealth of knowledge on these advisory panels, and so let's use the talents that we have that we've assembled here to be able to make sure that we are making the best decisions as an executive committee. So with that, we are at 5 o'clock, so we will adjourn. Look for emails to come out here shortly. And in the meantime, do your homework and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.